Welcome back for a new top 5 horror list. Since it is October and we are just about 2 weeks away from Halloween, hard to believe it's already mid October. But with that said, looking at this time around, last time we looked at 5 of my personal favorite horror games on the PS1. Now, just so you know, it doesn't have to be technically survival horror. As long as it has heavy amounts of horror in it, even if it's survival or more like hack and slash with heavy amounts, or even first person viewpoint game with heavy amounts of horror, then it qualifies. I'm not strictly to one genre slash subgenre of horror. So, with that said, just keep that in mind. This time around, we're going to look at 5 of my personal favorite horror games on the PS2. Next time, we will be looking at the GameCube, and then Halloween week, we'll be looking at 5 of my personal favorites on the Xbox 360. So, with that said, also enjoy the music in the background from Silent Hill 2. So, with that said, also let me know if maybe you like me. I also try to end up doing maybe a top 5 for the original Xbox. With that said, we have 3 honorable mentions that didn't quite make the top 5. So keep in mind these are my own personal perspectives on it, so just keep that in mind. First up of the 3 honorable mentions, we have to of course go to Silent Hill with one of the 3 honorable mentions. I think a somewhat underrated game in the Silent Hill franchise as a whole. It would be released on both the PS2 as well as, of course, also the PSP. Silent Hill Origins, I actually think it's pretty interesting overall. I mean, the main protagonist isn't as likable as maybe some past protagonists and stuff, but still, I don't mind him, and I definitely like some of the stuff you end up fighting in it. I get the point why some people may not like Origins as much, but for me, I think it deserves an honorable mention and just personal opinion. Keep in mind. But I actually have really enjoyed my time with Origins, and it amazes me. I'm surprised that more people don't actually appreciate this game. But, whatever. You can't always win. Second of the 3 honorable mentions is arguably, in my opinion, maybe the creepiest horror game I have ever played. As genuinely, the first time I ever played the original Fatal Frame stunned me genuinely how creepy the game is. From a story standpoint, it's definitely not the best Fatal Frame, but I will stand by, I still think it's the creepiest of the Fatal Frame series, and by far, in my opinion, Fatal Frame series is sadly somewhat overlooked throughout the years. At the time, it has more though of a cult following, as I don't think any of the Fatal Frame games were ever a greatest hit or anything like that, because it didn't do the sheer numbers. But for me, I think Tecmo and Team Ninja killed it with this series. For me, it is still arguably probably in my pantheon of maybe top 3 favorite horror franchises of all time, because I think pretty much every game in the series has been genuinely good and creepy, and I am happy to see remasters of the 4th and 5th games in the series. But with that said, if you've never played Fatal Frame 1 and you want a good scare, I do highly recommend it. Last, the honorable mentions is a game. Now, this one is a bit harder to find and can definitely cost a pretty penny, though it is cheaper now than what it was a few years ago. And that is Echo Knight Beyond, which is the 3rd installment of the Echo Knight series. Now, if you don't know, Echo Knight was a survival horror series that was developed and done by From Software, best well known for the Soul series, of course. But the first game and stuff, pretty much every game has always been more of a first person viewpoint game, so it gives it a little refreshing, as it was really one of the first horror games or series to actually do a first person viewpoint survival horror game. So I give it points for being one of the originators. Also, I will say Echo Knight 1 is probably the best of the trilogy of games, Echo Knight 2 never got actually released outside of the US, unfortunately, so it's almost impossible to play Echo Knight 2, unfortunately. Echo Knight 3, or rather Echo Knight Beyond, is very interesting as the fact this game takes place in outer space. Now, just know there is definitely a little too much backtracking in Beyond. Unfortunately, like I think, honestly, the first game is the best, though I've never had the opportunity to play the second. Still, I do have a soft spot for Echo Knight Beyond, and I feel Echo Knight series definitely gets overlooked, and not very many people have actually talked about this series on YouTube, outside of maybe one YouTuber I follow called NitroRad, which I appreciate. But I like this game more, definitely, than some people that have played it, but it is absurd nowadays if you want to collect it. Good luck finding it for a reasonable price tag now. With that said, number 5 favorite horror game, or at least for me personally, is arguably one of the more interesting games, I would say, definitely on the PS2 era, as you could even sometimes control, even after your character dies, so you can go after other characters. It is definitely interesting. It's very much not your traditional survival horror game, especially of the time period. But I think Sony actually did do a pretty decent job with this game, and it is interesting how more people actually don't talk about Siren, I think. Now, it would get sort of like a sequel, though I've never personally seen it available, at least in any game stores or anything. You might be able to find it on eBay. Price wise, I'm not sure how much it is. Now, I do know Siren 1, when I got it, I think I paid like $12 for it years back. Now, it's going for, I think, the last I checked, it's going for some like $60 plus now, so it's definitely going up. With that said, still, I think more people need to give this game a fair chance. Coming in number 4, funny enough, is the 4th installment in a series, and it is a game I will die on my heel defending. For me, at number 4 is Silent Hill 4: The Room. As I've said before, I'll say it again. The Room is arguably my second favorite in the Silent Hill series. In the recent years, it has ended up surpassing Silent Hill 1 as my second favorite Silent Hill game. Now, for me, when it comes to the Silent Hill series, for me personally, like, I love Silent Hill 2, I love Silent Hill 4. Silent Hill 3 I don't like as much as some people. Silent Hill 1 is a classic. I feel Silent Hill Downpour gets far too much hate. But with that series, and Share Memories is interesting. But for me, yeah, when it comes to PS2 era survival horror games, Silent Hill 4: The Room definitely holds a special place for me. One, I think the soundtrack is superb. I love the rock music and stuff, and some of the definite creature designs. At the same time, Silent Hill 4: The Room is by far, I think, maybe easily one of the hardest games of the franchise. Definitely a good challenge, and it's tricky, especially dealing with the ghost spirits in this game, as you can't stop them permanently. You have to have special swords, but unfortunately, it's not a permanent fix, as you will need the swords in the future for certain cases. You can nail a ghost down, and that's good at the moment if you need to explore like your surroundings and things. Also, it's interesting how while you're in the apartment, it's in first person, then when you go through a tunnel in the bathroom, it goes then to third person viewpoint, the traditional way. With that said, The Room, in my opinion, has done a lot more original stuff and is very unique and distinctive from the rest of the Silent Hill series. I like the creatures, and the main villain is interesting. Overall, it is just a fascinating, unique experience, unlike any other Silent Hill game, or really any other survival horror game that I can think of the 2000s. Team Silent killed it, in my opinion, with this. Coming in at number 3 is arguably, in my opinion, the GOAT of the Fatal Frame series. As I've mentioned a few times before, for me, my personal favorite Fatal Frame game has and always probably will be Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. In my opinion, great game, especially with the two sisters that are revolved around. And arguably, when you look at the girls, you can tell it's a Team Ninja game from the design, as the girls remind me an awful lot of Ione from Dead or Alive, design wise, the facial design and everything. But for me, this game still stands the test of time. I think graphically, it actually looks pretty solid, still really good for the time. But Team Ninja has always been known for doing really good graphic games. They always were one of, I think, the pushers at the time period of the sixth generation. Bar none, there were hardly anyone else that could touch them at the time. Nowadays, and not so much, but it's still like just their stylized like character designs. With that said, yeah, if you've never played any of Fatal Frames and curious about the old games, I recommend this one the most, as I think where it excels is in the storytelling and the level design and everything in general. I just think makes this the pinnacle of the franchise. Though, like I said, I think the first game is by far the creepiest of the series. Though, in my opinion, Tormented or Fatal Frame 3 is also really good. If actually you have the opportunity to play the entire trilogy, do so. You can play it on PS2 as well as original Xbox. Now, I don't know what the price is going for on original Xbox right now. On PS2, it's kind of 50-50, hit or miss, more like a roller coaster price was. Still, it's not insanely overpriced compared to some other horror games. Yeah, meaning a few specifics, but yeah, if you get a chance, this is the one I highly recommend the most. Personally, at least if you prefer better character overall interactions and storytelling aspects, that's where it excels in. With that said, coming in at number 2 is my second favorite of the Biohazard Resident Evil series. As I've said before, Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2 original, it remains my favorite RE game of all time, though for me, my second favorite of all time, of course, originally played on the Dreamcast and then would be called Veronica X for some reason on the PS2 and GameCube releases. Now, unfortunately, I cannot afford the GameCube version as I'm not willing to pay what it's going for now. It's absurd. PS2 version, however, is still very reasonable. And as you said, this version is the 5th anniversary edition, luckily not greatest hits, but also it includes a bonus disc of the original Devil May Cry. But with that said, yeah, for me, Code Veronica is a great game. Overall, I like the characters, and this would be the game where officially a certain very annoying character would reappear and become the more distinctive character we know today, that is Wesker. This was the game where he really made a return, plus it was interesting as it revolved around brother and sister, of course, Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield. When Chris was still a bit more normal and he wasn't Mr. Boulder punching that he was in RE5. With that said, I think this game excels. Soundtrack is superb. It kills. It is arguably, in my opinion, one of the top 3 Resident Evil games when it comes to its music. Though I still hold RE2 soundtrack a little bit higher, but for me, this game is great. Though it does have probably my favorite theme of the save rooms in the series. Also, I just like in general some of the creatures you play against in this game, though I did find annoying those creatures that have the long stretchy arms can be quite annoying at times to deal with. And yes, I'll admit, the sort of, I guess you could say, helper of sorts, yeah, it's a little whiny and a little too much reminds me of, obviously, younger Leonardo DiCaprio at the time. And yeah, very emo-ish, though he came out back before emo was really a thing, for the most part. But overall, still, I don't hate this game like some people out there. Cough, cough, Max, cough, cough. But anyways, with that said, coming in at number 1 by far with my special preferred show in the custom case I bought a while back. Silent Hill 2 is my number one favorite survival horror game on the PS2. I mean, really, one, why you think I was using Silent Hill 2 music in the background? For me, this is the gold standard of survival horror in general. This is really good from a psychological perspective, especially, I will argue, Pyramid Head for me is the most iconic creature in all of survival horror. Yes, don't get me wrong, I love other creatures, like specifically William Birkin or Mr. X, and of course Nemesis. Nemesis is probably the most iconic creature in RE by far, though I still have a rather fondness for just the overall development design of course, William Birkin. But with that said, Silent Hill 2 still holds, in my opinion, is the top of the mountain of the best example how you do a great all-time classic survival horror game. This is the masterpiece. This is the gold standard. There is no other horror game, in my opinion, or ever will be, that will ever be able to surpass RE2 OG Original. Now, if you want to play a bit more interesting experience, I do recommend getting the original Xbox version of RE2, as it is like half to less than half the price of the PS2 version. Plus, you get all the additional DLC, though you can get that by getting the Greatest Hits version of Silent Hill 2 on PS2. You also get the extra content, but only in the Greatest Hits version. So just know that. On Xbox, it's called Silent Hill 2 Restless Memories. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. And yeah, gotta admit, that is a pretty awesome custom cover art in my opinion. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe and have a good upcoming Halloween, everyone. See you again soon enough, and hopefully enjoyed the Silent Hill music in the background, enjoyed this list, and give me your thoughts what your favorite survival horror games are on PS2. With that said,